All right, James, the news is in. President-elect Trump, 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico on day one, unless we figure out our immigration. What do you think? We'll read the press release after.
Well, I think it's an aggressive way to crack down on any border violations, let it be people moving across the border and or elect substances going across the border as well. And it's a smart way of forcing Mexico and Canada to do something where it's not just addressing it from within the United States.
Yeah. Well, here, let's read it here. So this was November 25th, 4:35 p.m. As everyone is aware, thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico, composed of thousands of people, seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. I love how he capitalizes certain words. It's very old English. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long-simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time as that they do, it is time for them to pay a very big price. Well, yeah, that's pretty unambiguous. I mean, you gotta give the guy credit there for laying all his cards on the table. So I don't know. Well, let's see what some various. I think probably the three most rock star politicians right now in Canada. Let's see what they have to say. So here's our very own Danielle Smith. Is this up on the screen here? Yeah. So she says the incoming U.S. Donald Trump administration has valid concerns related to illegal activities at our shared border. We are calling on the federal government to work with the incoming administration to resolve these issues immediately, thereby avoiding any unnecessary tariffs on Canadian exports to the U.S. And then a little sell job here. Fortunately, the vast majority of Alberta's energy exports to the U.S. are delivered through secure and safe pipelines, which do not in any way contribute to these illegal activities at the border. As the largest exporter of oil and gas to the U.S., we look forward to working with the new administration to strengthen energy security for both the U.S. and Canada. I like it. I like it personally. That's just a big ol' let's restart that Keystone XL, eh?
You can see Danielle's hoping that regardless of what happens at a federal level, she's hoping that maybe there'll be some nuance in these tariffs what happens if most of the drugs are coming from BC and Ontario?
Yeah.
Or most of the people are kind of using Canada's lax immigration or refugee status claims, and then they're using that as a funnel to get into the United States. Then if that's not happening in Alberta, and if Alberta can show that, the question is, will all oil, will it be rolled back, or will there be any nuance, or will there...
Well, it's an interesting question because, there's, exactly like you say. I mean, the fentanyl's coming from BC. The illegal migration is happening through Ontario, Roxham Road. That's what it's called, right? Even if it wasn't happening through there, I mean, that's the obvious place for it to happen. I mean, there's, through Southern Ontario. I mean, it's a direct link into the U.S., into Michigan, New York, and right. Yeah, it's not happening through Alberta. The only thing we want to pump into the U.S. is that sweet petroleum, right?
Yeah, it's so it's hard to say if this is partially an aggressive bluff that'll be rolled back, but it may not be rolled back. And I'm wondering if there's going to be some posturing if at a federal level, politicians will use this to try to just win points to get elected rather than trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Because if this goes through, this is going to shift Canada into an aggressive, even further into a recession. We're going to see inflation go up. We're going to see prices everything's going to be more expensive, and this is just going to hurt.
Oh yeah,
across the board.
Yeah. Well, here, let me bring up John Rustad here. I almost said when I introduced the Danielle Smith tweet that I almost said our rock star premiers in Canada, but he's not the premier. He should have been, but he isn't. So John Rustad, of course, the leader of the Conservative Party of BC, very, very close election loss in just last month or earlier this month. We cannot afford a 25% tariff from our closest trading partner. BC's legislature must be called back immediately to introduce emergency provincial funding to secure our borders and to stop the illegal flow of migrants as well as fentanyl and other drugs. During BC's provincial election, the Conservative Party of BC supported reforms to drastically improve port policing and border security in BC. Now, in light of the US-Canada trade crisis, the Conservative Party of BC is asking EB's NDP to immediately adopt and fund the common sense Conservative strategy to improve border security in BC. Interesting, he's using this federal Conservative common sense line. I don't know if that's intentional or not. Our province's international borders should not be an open sieve that drugs and illegal migrants can flow through freely. It's time for emergency measures and immediate reforms. So, I mean, that's a pretty good reaction. I mean, that's pretty, he's not mincing words either. To be frank, it's pretty hard to argue against any of that. I don't know why. I can imagine that, maybe a CBC or a CTV or a Global article might see this and report it as some sort of, strongman talk or something, but it's pretty hard to find anything, particularly disagreeable with the statement, right?
So I think they might argue with the magnitude. They might argue with the measurability of this. They're like, well, we don't know how many immigrants, and we don't know how much is actually happening or how much fentanyl. Therefore,
it's not several thousand kilograms of fentanyl. It's only 1,000 kilograms of fentanyl a day.
So it almost sounds like so there was a super lab that was busted up in BC recently.
I heard about that, yeah.
And I have a feeling Trump or Trump's team saw that, and they probably took that to heart as well.
Yeah. Here, I'll show last tweet here that we have.
You might have to add it back in.
Yeah, for Dougie Ford over in Ontario. A 25% tariff would be devastating to workers and jobs in both Canada and the US. The federal government needs to take the situation at our border seriously. We need a Team Canada approach and response, and we need it now. Prime Minister Trudeau must call an urgent meeting with all premiers. Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea. And I think actually, after this tweet, I think there was plans drawn up for a premier and a territorial leader meeting.
And just a reminder, in Canada, not many people really see it this way, but we're set up in a way that the provinces and the federal government, the premiers have just as much power as our prime minister. And just because we see the federal government making there's certain initiatives or there's things that fall under the federal jurisdictionally, and then there's what falls under the umbrella of provincially. And one doesn't supersede the other. If something's outside of the provincial jurisdiction, then the federal, that's not in their place to make the calls on that. Just because they're seemingly at the top, it's not structured that way.
Yeah, so it's supplemental rather than superseding. Yeah.
Yes. So this is where I think Danielle Smith is going to flex the Sovereignty Act more and more.
As she should.
Which
she
should
do it.
It's not really anything new. It's just reiterating, well, here's how the provinces were set up. Here's what's under our jurisdiction. And here's us reaffirming that this is under our own sovereignty. And that's just a convenient kind of summary act or document to remind those who forget about that, or remind the federal government that energy, in this case, falls under the provincial
jurisdiction. Yeah, and to your point earlier, I mean, maybe that's a thing where, regardless what happens at a federal level, I mean, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. I mean, this is a pretty unprecedented thing, which Trump is good at doing. But I could definitely see a convincing argument being made that, listen, the tariffs are meant to address drugs and illegal immigrants, none of which, to my knowledge, Alberta has a problem with, either to or from the U.S. I don't think we're known as a drug producer, at least in comparison to BC and Ontario, and we're certainly not. I don't think there's anyone illegally entering or exiting to or from Canada and the U.S. But between the
or
Alberta and Montana border, like it's just
not to the degree.
No. So
it's a longer drive through the mountains.
That's right. And so if you have an argument that, like, listen, your concern isn't it doesn't apply here. Take this oil. Let's make a deal. I don't see, like, can you imagine a world where Justin Trudeau insists on Albertan oil being subject to the same 25% tariffs? Let's say that no deal gets done. If there is let's say Trump and Smith governments make a deal to not apply the tariffs on Canadian oil, can you see Trudeau maybe being, hey, no, it has to apply on this oil, rather than taking the win? He's not very good at taking the win.
It would seem unfair at this point, but I guess fairness is not always a big importance when it comes to these federal matters that treat different provinces in different ways.
That's for sure. As we discussed on our
previous on equalization, yeah. So it's hard to know to what degree at a federal level, obviously they'll have to work with premiers who are, and also just the voices pushing at a provincial level. That's why, like, John Rustad was a good example, even though he's not the leadership, he's the opposition leadership. Yeah. But he has a certain amount of, if these voices help push things in a certain direction. And Trudeau will have to, the tricky thing is if it involves like admitting that there was some involvement, or that, well, here's the thing, if at a federal level you can fix the problem so quickly, then what does that say about what you've been doing for the last 9 years?
No kidding.
So, like, it's a really messy situation where, like, either the problem doesn't get solved, and it shows your incompetence because it highlights the problem, shows that you're incompetent to fixing it, and then there's the recession that comes from 25% tariffs.
Yeah.
And there's only so much blaming on the U.S. like that you can do, because that'll be the thing. It's like let's just direct hate towards U.S. and Trump. Like, you can only say orange man bad so many times. Like there needs to be a little bit more nuance. Yeah, and then let's say they fix the problem, that still demonstrates incompetence.
Yeah,
and either negligence, because why did the problem get so bad in the first place?
Well, we know that they can fix these problems. So we saw it twice in the last couple of years in the U.S. We saw it, or maybe it was all this year, when Xi Jinping visited San Francisco. They cleaned up that downtown toot sweet. It was beautiful. It was shining. There was no homeless people, no open air drug dens, no nothing. They can do it. And they did it in Seattle, too, when they hosted the MLB All-Star Game. Seattle's almost as bad, if not just as bad, as San Francisco, but they can sure as hell clean up the homeless people and the drug problems if they've got cameras on them.
Yeah,
they actively choose not to.
So that's in the city. So there's still the aspect of, like, how secure is the border? Mm-hmm. So obviously, well, either you set up have we had a staffing shortage? Like, what is our actual Like, are we monitoring the border? Like, I know they love to throw cameras everywhere but the border. So like maybe let's start. Well, they've got cameras on a small protest of 100 people protesting like school board initiatives. What's the camera situation at the border?
Still never heard back from them, by the way. Small update. Called them twice,
Yeah.
but no, never heard back.
So now the other question is, how will this interact with the prevailing kind of idea of harm reduction? And we've got this open air drug use, and part of that is that, well, we need harm reduction because of all these drugs. And I think the average person in BC will look at the streets and be like, well, this is worse than it is. So whatever we're doing isn't making this better. But the harm reduction still saying, well, the drugs that are here are so harmful that we need to hand out supplemental drugs so that people are using something that's less harmful. That still opens up the question of like, well, where are these drugs coming from? And so right now, this is shining a big light on that. If they're not coming from the United States and they're coming from in BC, if there's a lot of productions happening in BC, and then it's supplying people in Vancouver, and it's going south and it's going to the Portland, and those are very similar in their like in the kind of degeneracy and kind of the kind of open air drug use that is seen in Portland, San Francisco, and
Seattle,
Vancouver, Seattle.
Yeah.
They all there's a lot of parallels. They all look very similar. You could take like a photo of a street of one and it would look kind of, it would be
same demographic,
hard
same
to distinguish.
Politics. Yeah. Same,
very similar
landscape.
that way.
Yeah.
So in these cases, this forces a lot of these issues to come to the forefront.
Yeah.
Good or bad. There will have to be something addressed, and you can't just, these things can't be ignored.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on what that will look like.
Yeah, that's the reckoning, right? That's the, do you know, if you're a Canadian politician who's hitched your wagon to safer supply, you know, despite every bit of evidence to the contrary that it's, you know, about its effectiveness, do you carry on? Do you persist in your programs that are demonstrably not working and just eat that tariff and make life miserable for everyone else? Or do you take the L, know that you know, you're going to lose some face, but, you know, see what potential benefits come from it, at least on an economic sense, you know, or even if not benefits, at least how do you mitigate potential disaster?
So what will happen, this is my prediction, we'll see some creativity. We'll see people taking the win. They're taking the loss, but they're going to claim that it's a win. And it's going to be twisted. It's going to shy away
they'll
from
take
details.
the tariff rather than change their policy.
Well, if they admit there's a problem, they will frame it in a way that makes, well, here's this fentanyl problem. Here's all these super labs, and we've been part of the solution the whole time, not part of the problem. So it's framing it in a way that they're still making it seem like they're winning. Which is another one of these cases where we have to be hyper vigilant and paying attention. We can't just let politicians say whatever and get away with it. Like,
that's the Canadian tradition, though, James. Yeah. That's in our DNA.
Well, maybe there's time for a change. So,
wouldn't that be something? Hey, cool. Well, hey, I have a feeling that you're probably right, and you know what they say: if you want to be taken seriously, you got to make a prediction. So we'll see. We got you know, Trump was kind enough to give us about 4 weeks notice, 3.5 weeks notice. So we'll see what innovative reforms our extremely competent and caring politicians can think of.
Well, it's here's a 25% tariff that may or may not happen, but here's some GST relief for a month or two.
Yeah, maybe they'll up that check from 250 to 300 just to help compensate it.
Yeah, it's I don't know how many people are buying that, or it's like, I'm gonna wait to buy a Christmas tree, or we get a benefit on groceries that aren't taxed with GST anyways. So it's like these things that they look good on paper, and then you're like, well, what does this actually mean?
James, it's the Canadian way.
Stop messing with the Canadian way of
We're all about appearances here. It's about stuff that sounds good, not stuff that does good.
Or does that just mean we're paying less GST on something that is already higher because of the carbon tax? Because the carbon tax, GST is applied after the carbon tax. So we're already paying more GST. Every time the carbon tax goes up, we're paying more GST. So like the government's fucking people twice.
Hey, sounds like you've had a little too much to think, sir.
Maybe.
Okay, well, hey, we'll see what happens. So, yeah, that's there's some of our very, very nuanced and important thoughts on Trump's 25% tariff proposal. So we will absolutely be making a follow-up video on this. I mean, geez, things might happen relatively quick here. We'll see when these the premier and prime minister meetings happen, if they do happen, and see what they have to say. Maybe we'll have some good news to report. Maybe we'll have some, I mean, honestly, we'll probably have some really depressing, stupid news to report. But hey, we did our best. We put this out into the world. We'll see if it has any effect. Please feel free to comment below. Should have said this at the beginning of the clip, but welcome to our 500 some new subscribers. Thanks for subscribing to us on YouTube. Follow us on X as well. We'll put links below. We'll try to keep pumping out content for you guys that you like. Generate some good discussions like it has on our video with our interview with Marty Belanger, and we'll link all that below as well. And thanks as always. Thanks, James.
Yeah. Till the next one. Cheers.
Cheers.